In 1956, when Americans were building bomb shelters and watching the skies for Soviet bombers, a science fiction film asked a simple question. What if the threat didn't come from across the ocean? What if it came from another planet? Today, let's take a look at a film whose visual effects are spectacular, and there's no CGI. Now, if you like classic movies, TV, and nostalgia, you're going to love it here at Rerun Zone, so like, share, subscribe, and become a channel member. Now, let's get into it. Fantasy, sci-fi, horror, Rerun Zone. By 1956, the Second World War was over a decade in the past, but peace didn't exactly feel secure. The Cold War was real, not just theoretical. Children practiced duck and cover drills in classrooms. Civil defense pamphlets explained how to stock a basement shelter. Radar installations dotted the coasts. The threat most people imagined wasn't science fiction anymore. It was Soviet bombers crossing over the Arctic. But Earth versus the Flying Saucers tapped into a different kind of jitters. Just 4 years earlier in 1952, Washington D.C. went into a frenzy when radar tracked actual, unidentified objects over the Capitol. Fighter jets were scrambled, and it was front-page news. So when those saucers appeared on the silver screen, it didn't feel like a fairy tale. It felt like a what-if, a contingency plan. Newspapers ran the story nationwide. The term flying saucer was no longer pulp magazine material, it was front-page news. By the mid-1950s, UFO sightings were being reported on a regular basis. Whether they were weather balloons, misidentified aircraft, or something else, the public imagination was definitely stirred. At the same time, the space race was starting. Rockets weren't experimental anymore. They were the next military frontier. So when Earth versus the Flying Saucers arrived in theaters in 1956, it was tapping into a fear that had already been stoked. Not a fear of bombers coming from across the ocean, but something more unknown. An invasion from another world. And maybe that's why this film still works. It treated that possibility not as a fantasy, but as a reality. Now, let's talk about the real star of the show, Ray Harryhausen. Special effects legend. Long before movies were making CGI monsters, Ray was a one-man army of imagination. A serious tone only works if what you're seeing feels real, believable. And in 1956, that fell mostly on this one man. Harryhausen wasn't just animating monsters, like in The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, or It Came from Beneath the Sea. He was engineering credibility. Ray didn't want wobbly toy UFOs. He engineered those saucers to glide and rotate with a chilling mechanical precision. When you see the Capitol Dome fracture or the Washington Monument shatter, you can actually feel the mass of the debris. Ray used stop-motion animation, photographing every tiny movement by hand, frame by tedious frame. To make the saucers look real, Ray focused on integration. He made sure that the models cast physical shadows and reflected light naturally against the live-action footage. In an era of limited tech, he didn't just animate objects. He built entire miniature cities just to tear them down. By the time Earth versus the Flying Saucers went into production, he'd already made a name for himself with creatures that moved with weight and personality. But this was different. These weren't mythological beasts or prehistoric animals. These were machines. Cold, metallic, coordinated machines. The flying saucers in this film don't wobble like toys. They glide. They pivot. They rotate with mechanical precision. When they tilt to fire their weapons, there's intention behind the movement. Harryhausen understood something important. The more restrained the motion, the more believable it would feel. Then there's the collapse of the Capitol Dome in Washington, D.C. In 1956, it wasn't a computer-generated spectacle. It was painstaking stop-motion work combined with miniatures, matte paintings, and carefully matched live-action plates. Every frame required patience, every movement photographed by hand. Modern films can destroy cities with the click of a mouse, but Harryhausen had to build them first. Forget the compassionate aliens like Klaatu from The Day the Earth Stood Still. By 56, the mood had changed. These visitors weren't here to teach us a lesson. They were here to move in. For a lot of the film, the flying saucers are the threat. But eventually we see who's inside. The aliens are clinical and cold. Tall, pale, and skeletal, wearing suits that look like protective armor. They don't deliver great speeches. They don't feel like creatures of passion or compassion. They feel like they're here to conquer. They feel organized and reflect our fear of a calculated, coordinated attack from a distant power. They aren't teachers, they're occupiers. They issue ultimatums. They expect compliance. And when they don't receive it, they escalate their terror campaign. They aren't chaotic monsters either. They're organized, strategic, unified, and somehow that's even more frightening. Even their helmets and breathing apparatus add to that feeling. They aren't mystical visitors. They've come prepared for battle. There's no curiosity, only objective. And when they move, they advance. The tone is serious and it prevents the film from sliding into camp territory. There's something very eerie about how matter-of-fact they are. They don't hate humanity. They just intend to replace it. When the saucers arrive over Washington, D.C., Ray Harryhausen's stop-motion work turns landmarks into targets. The saucers tilt, fire, and the Capitol dome fractures and collapses. The Washington Monument shatters and falls in pieces. There's no heroic last-second rescue by some maverick hero, just all-out alien destruction. Today, we're used to seeing cities leveled in blockbuster films, but in 1956, this was radical. Here, the threat is direct. These weren't imaginary structures, they were symbols of America, and America was thought of as untouchable. Remember, only 4 years earlier, radar operators in Washington had tracked unidentified objects over the same airspace. Newspapers ran dramatic headlines. The idea of unknown craft over the Capitol was real. When audiences watched those saucers descend on the city, it didn't feel like fantasy anymore. It felt like a nightmare. The invasion isn't chaotic, it's organized. Washington isn't destroyed in anger, it's just neutralized. And in 1956, that kind of calculated assault felt chillingly real. In the 1950s, Americans were being told that survival in a nuclear age would depend on preparedness, on civil defense networks, early warning systems, scientific research, and technological superiority. And that's exactly how the film frames humanity's survival. The turning point comes when Dr. Russell Marvin and his team find out what the saucers are vulnerable to, and it's not just bullets or bombs. If you haven't seen this movie before, or maybe in decades, I won't give the ending away here, but it's brilliant. This was the decade of atomic laboratories, jet propulsion, and early space exploration. The belief was that science had created terrifying weapons, but science could also protect civilization. It's a way different tone from films like War of the Worlds, where humanity is saved through a simple germ. Here, survival is earned through human ingenuity. The military in this film works alongside scientists. The message is clear. Cooperation between intellect and defense is humanity's best hope. In 1956, as today, we were living under the shadow of weapons powerful enough to end civilization. The comfort came from believing that intelligence, both scientific and strategic, could keep that shadow at bay. In 1956, this film quietly established a blueprint. It helped define what a flying saucer looked like on screen. Metallic, rotating, coordinated. It reinforced the idea that alien invasions would not be chaotic accidents, but organized campaigns. It made destruction of national landmarks part of the visual language of the genre. Long before later invasion films leveled cities with digital precision, Ray Harryhausen showed audiences their own capital under attack. That image lingered. You can trace a line from this film forward. Later invasion stories would grow louder, bigger, and more technologically complex. But the core elements are here. Unidentified objects on radar, scientists racing against time, governments scrambling to respond, humanity discovering a weakness in the invaders' technology. Even the tone, procedural, strategic, almost documentary in its seriousness, echoes through decades of alien invasion cinema. But what gives Earth vs. the Flying Saucers its staying power is its sincerity. The film believes in its premise. It treats invasion as a military problem to be solved, not a spectacle to be celebrated. It reflects a time when Americans were learning to live under a sky that didn't feel empty or safe anymore. By the mid-1950s, rockets were real, radar was real, nuclear weapons were real. So the idea that something might descend from above the atmosphere didn't feel like fantasy anymore. It felt more like the next frontier of fear. And maybe that's why this film still works. Not because of nostalgia, not because of camp, but because it captures a moment when science fiction and geopolitical anxiety were almost indistinguishable. In 1956, the sky had become contested territory. Earth versus the Flying Saucers just asked what might happen if someone else got there first. These old films are magic and are worth preserving. They're entertainment, sure, but they're time capsules into our past. They tell us about ourselves and give us an insight into what we worried about in the day, and maybe, just maybe, tell us about what not to do in the present or the future. Let's keep their memory alive and pass on these classics to the younger generations. Now, if you like classic movies, TV, and nostalgia, I really think you're going to love it here at Rerun Zone. So like, share, subscribe, and become a channel member. It helps me to keep making these videos about the classics that I don't want to fade into distant memory. As always, thanks for watching. This is Rich from Rerun Zone. I'll see you next time, and have a good night.